Poppy Playtime Chapter 5 brought us a ton of new characters, a bunch of huge new reveals, and of course, plenty of new lore. In fact, this chapter brought so much new content that you probably missed at least some of it. So here are some of the most interesting details I could find, as well as some of my own theories about what they could all mean. Here are 15 things you might have missed in Poppy Playtime Chapter 5. 23 missing toys. Chapter 5 introduced a whole new mystery for us to theorize over. We have long wondered whether anyone could have escaped the factory in the 10 years that followed the Hour of Joy. Well, as it turns out, somebody did. In Giblet's room, we can find what appears to be a newspaper created for the toys inside the factory called the Better Press. Now, obviously, this is all just propaganda for the toys under the prototype's control. But in this article, we learn that a group of toys who rejected the prototype after the Hour of Joy were named the Joyless. The Joyless were led by someone named Gentle John, and there was a rumor among the toys that this group had managed to escape the factory. The article, however, claims that this group were found in the Innovation Wing, and all that was left of them was their burnt remains. But as Giblet wrote on the front of this article, this is all very convenient. In a later cassette tape, we learn that the prototype was hunting for this group. While interrogating an unnamed toy, the prototype learns that this group did indeed leave the factory. After learning who else knew, the prototype killed the toy in a way that sounds suspiciously like burning. The implication is clear. The group did indeed escape, and the prototype killed any witnesses, pretending their burnt bodies were the escapees. This way, no one else would know that it was possible to escape, and since the bodies were burnt, no one could verify who they truly belonged to. That, and of course anyone who did know, would now be too scared to say anything. This now means we have major evidence that people, probably toys, are out of the factory in the world somewhere. Whether they are in hiding or have been discovered by Playtime Co or someone else is yet to be known. But I'm sure this isn't the last time we will hear of Gentle John and his Joyless. Perhaps we will see them in one of Playtime Co's other locations. The factory isn't Playtime Co's only location. One of the most exciting revelations this chapter is that our theories about other Playtime Co locations have now been proven correct. I said a long time ago that it seems very odd that a company the size of Playtime Co would only have one building. Chapter 3 gave us clues to the Play Park, an area that looked like a Playtime Co theme park. Many assumed that this would be the location of Chapter 4, but I theorized that this could be a separate location entirely. Chapter 5 not only confirmed that the Play Park is a separate location, but that Playtime Co had even more locations in the US and abroad. Eddie and Lath talk about a location in Tokyo, and this note reveals several Playtime Co projects. One in the US named Broader Horizons, and one that is written in Japanese that translates to New Beginning. The Play Park is also named as Project Garden World. Now that we know the miraculous scientific process was derived from a growth medium made from poppies, Garden World would make a lot of sense. Now I think this is a huge hint that the series will continue after Poppy Playtime ends. These new locations could have their own series with new characters, new stories, and new lore that all tie back into the main series somehow. I think this is pretty great. I mean, look at how FNAF has evolved over the years, and with how Poppy Playtime is improving, I would love to see where they take it. But we also get a bit of a hint that these other locations were facing their own problems too. The Playtime Co main factory was supposed to ship poppy seeds and other materials to their overseas locations, but the shipment never made it since the Hour of Joy happened before they could be sent. Funnily enough, an unknown experiment actually managed to find the poppy seeds and then ate them. I am sure that had no negative consequences whatsoever. Fun fact, poppy seeds in large quantities can be addictive, since poppy seeds contain opiates. This is where Game of Thrones got milk of the poppy from. It's essentially morphine. We could theorize that the experiments eating the flesh made from this poppy gel could also have negative consequences, but for now let's just say that I'm very excited and hopeful that one day we will get to explore these sister locations. Eddie's office. Speaking of those sister locations, Chapter 5 gives us some huge reveals about one of the mysterious executives, Eddie Ritterman. You can find Eddie's office tucked away behind a flame puzzle, and inside we can find a letter. This letter reveals that Eddie is sick. He is 59 years old at the time of the game, and he is suffering with a progressive disease known as Kennedy's disease. This is slowly causing his legs and grip to fail. This disease is usually not life-threatening and people generally have a normal lifespan, but it does weaken their body, often leading to them having to use a wheelchair. I wonder if this is why Eddie was so keen to further Playtime Co's research. A huge component of Playtime Co's scientific process was creating bigger and better bodies for the orphans. I wonder if Eddie hopes to one day use this research to fix his own body and possibly make himself immortal like the prototype. After all, this chapter gave us a huge clue that Eddie is still alive. In a cassette tape between Eddie and Laith Pierre, we learn that Eddie was away on business at the time of the Hour of Joy. We know that Tokyo had its own Playtime Co building, and this was likely the project known as New Beginning. Yes, they never got their latest shipment of poppy seeds, but it has been 10 years since the original Playtime Co factory fell. Now that we know Eddie, the head of research, is still alive, they have had plenty of time to continue that science in Tokyo. Eddie even tells Leif that very soon Tokyo will be up to speed, and that the old Playtime Co factory won't even be their primary focus anymore. That was 10 years ago, meaning that the Tokyo facility might have even surpassed that original research under Eddie's direction. If they were almost up to speed, then they likely had at least some samples of the poppy gel medium. So in those many years, I'm sure they would have been able to replicate it. Or perhaps they went in a very different direction with their research now that their supply had been cut off. Very interesting either way. This mystery probably explains why the Playtime Co factory hasn't been condemned after all these years. Now we know that Eddie is still around pulling the strings, he's probably using all that Playtime Co money to keep the authorities away. Return of the Lemon. One of Poppy Playtime's silliest Easter eggs makes its return in Chapter 5. Lemon! The lemon has appeared in every chapter in one way or another, but the latest chapter gives this silly Easter egg a full explanation. Many people have been convinced that the lemon was just an inside joke between the devs, but quite a while ago I theorized that the lemon was actually a reference to Portal. Poppy Playtime shares a lot of similarities with two game series, BioShock and Portal. The latter had an incredibly iconic speech about lemons, as well as a few more nods to them throughout the game. Well, Chapter 5 finally set this debate to rest with a note found in a hidden room in the game. We learn that these lemons are genetically modified. Likely they were one of the objects that Playtime Co exposed to the poppy gel medium, something we now know was a growth medium. This does explain why these lemons are so huge. We also learn that someone was hiding them throughout the factory, a little joke between colleagues. But this lemon Easter egg doesn't end there. You see, this lemon has a family. If you go back to this elevator shaft near the window with the lemon on it, do a little bit of tricky parkour, you can get up to that room. Here you can find the missing lemon, and after reuniting it with his family, you are rewarded with a tease for CG5's upcoming Poppy Playtime song. The secret hidden switches. Now this one was a very intriguing secret with a slightly less intriguing outcome. Throughout the game you can find secret switches. These are grabpack hand scanners that are hidden in some pretty easy to miss locations, but they don't appear to do anything once scanned. The first one that I found was underneath Bron, but there were actually 7 of these scattered around the factory. Now I haven't found them all myself, but thanks to LutchClutch on Twitter, it turns out if you find all 7 of them in a single playthrough, you are treated to, well, this.
It would take an extinction-level event to stop this late Cretaceous composer. He's the Pianosaurus. He plays just for us. We join the chorus. P-I-A-A-O-saurus.
Justice for Pianosaurus, I guess? Preston's note. I actually want to add a bonus one into this video, so I guess it's 16 things you might have missed. But one really interesting note you can find in the game was written by Preston Willard. He was the character from the ARG, and now somebody we know who was directly involved in helping to plot the Hour of Joy. This note is a confession, and it explains how Preston believes that there were 150 people involved in the scientific process who were all guilty for their involvement. He was going to write down all 150, but we can only see a few of them on this note. Interestingly, the first person he places on this list is himself, showing how he feels incredibly guilty for it. The next ones are obvious candidates: Late Pierre, Eddie, Harley Sawyer, and Bruno White. Dr. White was one of the characters we learnt about back in Chapter 3. But there is one name that is suspiciously absent from this list, and that is Stella Graber. Does this mean that Preston believes she was innocent, or did he just not have time to write her name? Another interesting name on this list is Marcus. At the end of this letter, he says, "Jessica Marcus, I'm sorry." The spelling of that name means he is talking to Marcus Brickley. This is the character that Jacksepticeye played in Chapter 2, and supposedly a character that was supposed to return in Chapter 5, but unfortunately Jacksepticeye was a little bit busy. Lily's not-so-secret identity. One of the most interesting characters in Chapter 5 was Lily Lovebraids. I theorized that Lily might have been a staff member turned into a toy, and that staff member was Stella Graber. Now, while I was incorrect, she wasn't Stella, we did learn that she was indeed a staff member. Lily was created by head counselor Gracie Green, both literally and figuratively. Gracie was the one who created the conditioning that was used to brainwash the experiments into behaving the way Playtime Co wanted them to. First, they were convinced that being a toy would be wonderful. Then they were convinced that they were a toy and always had been a toy. This conditioning went further though. As Playtime Co began to change, likely under the new direction of Harley Sawyer, the conditioning was used to get the toys to do horrific things disguised as fun and games. Huggy was told to put the bad toys in the bad toy box, but if you listen closely you can hear that the toys were being dropped into the machines that we found Globy in. Yup, they trained Huggy to kill toys that disobeyed. But all of this conditioning would eventually backfire on Miss Gracie. At some point, Gracie was turned into the toy Lily Lovebraids. We learned from a note in her house that Jessica Newman was overseeing this project, and this entire area was built as a way to maintain the illusion. At first, Gracie rejected the area, trying to escape, but over time, with more conditioning and more exposure to the red smoke, Gracie eventually began to accept her new role as Lily. After the Hour of Joy, Gracie was locked in this house by the prototype as punishment for her crimes. Now, isolation is incredibly damaging for the human mind, something one of the scientists mentioned in another note. Chloe Arkins was slowly beginning to feel isolated even as she was surrounded by her co-workers, but to be completely isolated with no one to talk to for so long completely broke Miss Gracie. This is a big theme of the movie Castaway. After his plane crashes, Chuck is stranded alone on a desert island. As isolation slowly takes its toll, Chuck begins to use a volleyball as his only companion. He calls him Wilson and he talks to it, even arguing with it at times. This is exactly what we see Lily do with the Candy Cat head. But the cassette we find shows the exact moment that Miss Gracie snaps. In this tape, we can hear Miss Gracie, now trapped within the toy body and locked away, slowly slipping into madness. This cassette has the description, "A single mind splits in two," and we can hear how Gracie can no longer remember her name.
Miss Gracie. Dear Miss Gracie. You have a first name, what was it? What are we talking about, Miss Gracie? Is this another lesson? Just ignore her. She's not real. It's only you here. Just you.
As the Lily persona slowly takes over, we hear her talk more and more in Lily's childlike voice.
Silly. She's on the screen. She's not actually in the room with us. Look around.
Gracie's pleading finally stops as Lily begins to laugh maniacally, all while Miss Gracie's conditioning plays in the background. Now, there are a number of questions I hope to tackle in a future theory. Why was Miss Gracie turned into a doll, and why did they use her own conditioning on her? Did Miss Gracie become a problem, or was this just Playtime Co pushing the boundaries of their own science? But it turns out that Lily wasn't the only toy to be trapped within Playtime Co. The Hidden Trapped Outimals. Chapter 5 introduces the Wrong Side Outimals. These are one of Playtime Co.'s last toy lines and one that wasn't received particularly well. But the chapter also uses their concept for the main enemy critters. The experiments we see throughout this entire chapter are smiling and nightmare critters that have been turned inside out. It's heavily implied that this is what happens to the experiments that defy the prototype. This is a cruel punishment inflicted on those who don't follow the rules. But it also seems odd that there are no normal toys left down here at all. I think the prototype has been doing this to these toys because he has run out of test subjects. Either the prototype is driven to keep experimenting, he doesn't know anything else, or he's still trying to figure out that breakthrough and this is all he has left. But if this wasn't punishment enough, we can find several wrong side Outimals trapped throughout the chapter. You can find one in this boiler. Interacting with the door will cause them to make noises. One is trapped in this cupboard. One behind this door, and so on. You can often hear them breathing when they're trapped, as if being trapped underground in a toy body and then being turned inside out wasn't punishment enough. Rich's fate. Rich Lovitz has consistently been one of the most important characters in the series. He has appeared in VHS tapes in every single chapter, and his journey has been closely documented. He began as a factory floor worker with a legendary temper before being demoted to the Misfit Toy section as punishment for his complaints against the company. Later, he was given a second chance by Stuart, who recognized his good nature and told him that maybe one day he could take over as head of shipping. In Chapter 4, we learned that he did indeed get that promotion, and as head of shipping, he tried his best to look after the staff under his care, something of a rarity within Playtime Co. Now, in Chapter 5, we learn that the executives were still keeping a close eye on Rich. While shipments were being made in secret under Rich's nose, the executives were noticing that he was slowly becoming a problem. Eddie and Lath talk about how Rich was becoming a man of the people. As Playtime Co. was a company that ruled their staff with an iron grip, they saw him as a threat. Now we know that the executives had several methods of removing threats. Some were killed by the bigger bodies, others were transformed into toys, and Sawyer was turned into a digital version of himself using his own technology. Talk about a twist of irony. But with Rich, Eddie came up with a more delicate solution. He noted that removing him would only make him a martyr, so instead, Eddie suggested giving him yet another promotion. A big one with its own car parking space and all. Eddie hoped that this would show that he was just another corporate shill, that he cared more about money than the staff under his command. Now it's not clear exactly what this promotion was or if it had the desired effect, but how far can you really go above the head of shipping? We still don't know if Rich survived the Hour of Joy, although we do know he was alive very close to it. We don't know whether he was turned into a toy or if he managed to escape, but I am absolutely convinced that we will learn more about him in Chapter 6, so keep an eye out for that one. The Undercity. Fairly early on in the chapter, if you look out the window, you can see what looks to be an entire underground city. Now I know exactly what you're thinking. Bloody hell, how far down did they dig? I guess it saves on heating costs when you're right next to the Earth's core. I'm kidding, obviously, but remember when I said that this game was based on Portal and BioShock? Well, this is just another tick in BioShock's box. That game series was all about an entire city hidden under the sea, or in the air in BioShock Infinite's case. Those games were all about the hubris of man combined with miraculous science. Andrew Ryan wanted to create his own utopia. He created a city under the sea known as Rapture, away from governments and taxes, claiming that both communism and capitalism were just different ways of getting you to work for the man. But of course, his utopia didn't last long. When things started to go wrong, largely because of a miracle substance called Adam that could rewrite your DNA, Ryan ended up becoming a dictator. The scientists of Rapture used children to harvest and refine this substance, indoctrinating them into believing they were doing good for the city. This all sounds very similar to Poppy Playtime. We already had the miracle substance, something we learnt more about this chapter, we had the scientists using children for their own ends, and now we even have the hidden city. But I think there is much more to this hidden city, and that brings me very nicely onto my next point. A better place. During the prototype's reveal scene, we get some more information about the orphans that we have been trying to save. We were told that they were still alive after all this time, we just didn't know how. 1006 tells Poppy that they are in a better place, something that upsets Poppy a great deal. Now at first, I assumed that a better place was a euphemism for dead, but taking a closer look reveals that it is far more complicated than that. The first clue is that the subtitles for A Better Place are capitalized. Now Mob are very careful with their subtitles and with their small details in general. This hints that A Better Place is a name, but we get even more clues that A Better Place is indeed referring to an actual place. In one of the cassette tapes, we hear a conversation between the prototype and Elliot Ludwig. The main takeaway from this tape is that the prototype was a boy named Oliver, likely the child's remains found at Elliot's home that we learnt about in Chapter 3. Remember, those remains were specifically stated to be a boy, so they weren't Poppy. This also makes sense as to why the prototype posed as Ollie. He was using his original identity to trick Poppy into revealing secrets to him. But we also learn that the prototype felt jealous of Poppy. It was clear to him that he was the test run so that Elliot could perfect the science and resurrect his daughter. Elliot obviously didn't want to attempt the procedure on his beloved daughter until he knew for sure it would work. This is where Oliver gets the name the prototype, and this led to some resentment. Oliver knew that everything that had been done to him was all for Poppy. As he puts it, it was never about his better place. Now I am not sure that this is the entire story. The tape strongly hints that someone, likely Oliver's father, attacked him with a hammer. His human body was probably left broken, partly hence the chapter's name, Broken Things. Elliot probably chose Oliver as his first test subject because he was broken. Elliot, the man who did everything to bring joy to children, likely chose Ollie because he wanted to build a new body for him, one that was better. But in his hubris, Elliot failed to realize there was one part of Ollie that could not be fixed so simply: his mind. I think all of Elliot's research now makes sense. He built new bodies for Ollie and his daughter, but as smart as he was, he knew that society would never accept living toys. So he began to build them their own world underground, their own better place. As they would live forever, they could live underground, away from conflict, struggle, and war, something Elliot had first-hand experience with. But after Elliot's death, Leith Pierre and the others discovered his plans for a better place, and they wanted to take that utopia for themselves. The prototype is not a jester. Chapter 5 finally revealed the prototype in all of his glory. Isn't he wonderful? But there has been quite a bit of debate about his design. Some people love him, some people aren't a fan, with some claiming that his body doesn't make sense. Some people are confused as to why Elliot would make a jester with spider legs, but I think it makes perfect sense. The top and bottom halves of the prototype don't seem to match, but what if that was by design? Elliot created toys in a very traditional sense. It was only much later that Playtime Co went wild and silly with their designs. Jesters aren't exactly a traditional toy, but one toy that looks like a jester that is a Jack-in-the-Box. You know, the toy that is kept a surprise until you wind them up and then they jump out and scare you. Well, we wound up the prototype and here he is. If the prototype was originally supposed to be a Jack-in-the-Box, then that would explain why his top half doesn't seem to fit the bottom. His legs might have come later, possibly even something that he built for himself, since we see that he's still adding parts to himself all these years later. It's even possible that Elliot chose this design for a reason. Since 1006 was the prototype and Elliot hadn't yet perfected the science, and now knowing that the poppy gel was a growth medium that required additional effort to stop growing, it's possible that Elliot chose this design so that the box could hide the mechanical systems that he needed to use. This could even play a part into why the prototype broke down mentally. His own human body was so broken, but his new toy body was confined to a box. Now, one thing I have seen people claim is that the prototype can't have been a Jack-in-the-Box since we already have Boxy Boo and he pretty much fills that role already. Except, this would make things even more interesting. We know that Harley Sawyer created Boxy as his first bigger body experiment. Harley absolutely hated Elliot in the end, and he was a very proud man. I can absolutely imagine Sawyer making his first experiment, his very own prototype, a mirror to Elliot's, partly as a, look, I can do it better, and also partly as a way to mock his former master. Whereas Elliot's first experiment was created out of love for his daughter, Sawyer's first experiment was created out of hatred for his adopted father. I'm using that metaphorically, but both of these men ended up using a child for their own ends, and both ended up dying because of it. A mirror to Poppy's VHS. Chapter 5 might not have the quantity of VHS tapes as previous chapters, but it more than makes up for it in their quality. Well, that and their whole ton of audio cassettes. But one of the VHS tapes we get this chapter was incredibly strange. This VHS, which can be found in the labs, shows an instructional tape on how to take care of your human. It shows human organs, bones, and other tissue being used in experiments. If you look closely, you can see that this tape was made after the Hour of Joy, so it was likely the prototype that made it. Why? Who knows? Perhaps he was mocking the scientific process, or perhaps this was a genuine attempt at him creating his own. He even uses proper sources, citing Dr. White et al., so perhaps the prototype is using knowledge he learned from Elliot and his scientific process. We see a still in this VHS that shows what appears to be Poppy's head, including her entire brain, as I theorized long ago. Alongside this is what looks to be the prototype's hand when he was still human. As I said earlier, I think the prototype was attacked by someone with a hammer, so these metal bones were likely replacements but probably caused him a great deal of pain. That also explains why the prototype has been slowly going mad. But the most interesting thing about this is that this is a mirror to the very first VHS that we ever got for Poppy Playtime. This perfectly mirrors the How to Care for Your Poppy Doll VHS that was used as a trailer for the first chapter. This trailer showed off the darker side to the series through small and sometimes hidden details. It was this very trailer that got me interested in the game in the first place. Seeing the prototype recreate this, but with either a lack of understanding or a lack of care for human life, was a very cool moment, and it shows how the factory has come full circle in the timeline. Huggy's hidden VHS tape. Another VHS tape which is a little tricky to find, shows more of Huggy's experimental procedure. To get this tape, you have to memorize the door code from Huggy's memory. It's a memory that you made of his memory, kind of a bit like what the Doctor is now, I guess. We now know that the experiments were submerged in the Poppy gel medium. This medium was a growth substance and it bonded to anything living it was combined with. This essentially caused the Poppy gel to fuse with the subject and cause it to mutate. But it also grafted onto the non-biological matter that made up the toy body. It seems like the brain was implanted into the toy body alongside an artificial skeleton made of real bone. The gel medium then began to literally create a body within that toy using the biological matter present. Once the body had grown within the limits of the toy body, the scientists then used the negation medium to stop that growth. We can see that after 2 weeks in this gel medium, Huggy had begun to grow teeth. This is something I theorized in a previous video, and it now explains exactly how Playtime Co. were able to make living toys of all these different shapes and sizes. But this VHS finally confirms a long-standing fan theory. This tape heavily implies that Kissy Missy was created to be a calming presence for Huggy. We now know that Miss Gracie's conditioning was convincing the toys that they were toys and that they had always been toys. The illusion worked much better when the experiments were kept in an environment that distracted them from all the horror. Almost every toy that we have encountered in this game slowly snaps over time, and this always comes after an event of stress. This is something that led Playtime Co. to create entire dioramas, as they call them, to keep the toys' minds from unraveling. Although, as we've seen throughout the chapters, over time the conditioning fails, and all it takes is a little emotional push for everything to fall apart. The cycle of joy. Joy has been a very important word in Poppy Playtime. Elliot's mission was to bring joy to children, but the downfall of the factory was known as the Hour of Joy. In Chapter 5, we got another component to this theme with Miss Gracie's conditioning. Gracie Green used the concept of joy as a key part of her brainwashing process. She convinced the toys that being a toy would bring them joy, but then also convinced them that it was their job to bring even more joy to others. This constant indoctrination of joy was likely a large part of how the prototype seized control of the factory. He convinced many of the toys, like Huggy, that the way to bring joy to the experiments was to let them all loose and kill the staff. Elliot tried to bring joy to all children and ended up creating a scientific process that was used for terrible reasons. Good intentions, bad outcome. Playtime Co. tried to continue this research, using it to benefit the children under their care by curing the sick and the dying, but their research was twisted by Harley Sawyer, who used it only for his own gain. Good intentions, bad outcomes. The prototype had most of the staff killed and took control of the factory so that the experiments could inherit the space and live in peace. These, after all, were horrific conditions, and many of these experiments were not treated well at all. But the experiments, just like everyone else, all had different ideas about what utopia looked like, and not all of them agreed with killing the staff. This led to a civil war of toys, and the prototype became a dictator. Once again, good intentions, bad outcomes. Gracie's conditioning is just one more part of this puzzle. By trying to brainwash the toys into being happy, Gracie gave the prototype a way to control them by controlling their joy, and her own joy was taken from her as a result. Now we know that Gracie ended up as Lily Lovebraids and that her own conditioning was used against her. But I think this whole metaphor is telling us how an eye for an eye makes the whole world blind. By getting revenge on the staff, the prototype created a whole new world of horror. Now Poppy's trying to get revenge on the prototype, creating yet again more horror. Playtime Co. tried to create a cycle of joy, but all it really made was a cycle of suffering. Coraline references. Poppy Playtime's biggest villain, the prototype, see what I did there, was fully revealed in Chapter 5, but this chapter also reinforced some of our oldest theories about the character. All the way back before Chapter 2 released, all we had to go on was a scribble on a wall. Back before we even knew what this character was called, I pointed out the similarity between this claw and a character from the movie Coraline. That's right, Experiment 1006, the prototype is inspired by the other mother? Seriously though, both characters are creepy spider-like creatures with metallic hands, both like to create new toys, and both want to trap children in another world forever. But if you thought this was just a coincidence, Chapter 5 all but confirmed the link. At Lily's tea party, we can see one of her dolls has buttons for eyes, a signature part of the movie. But the prototype's reveal also mirrors a scene from that movie too. The other mother was very sweet to Coraline until Coraline learnt of her plans and rose against her. The prototype was similarly very kind to the experiments until they rose against him. The other mother also had a porcelain cracked face, something now shared by both Poppy and the prototype. More generally, Coraline is a story about family. The other mother tried to build a family for Coraline, something she felt she needed. This family felt perfect, warm, kind, and everything Coraline wanted. This place was a better place. But just like in Poppy Playtime, this wonderful family made of toys, this better place, wasn't quite as perfect as it seemed. So there we go, I had to do 15 things for this video since there was just so much in this chapter to talk about. I actually think this was the best chapter yet, and I'm super excited for Chapter 6 and to see if we get any more games down the road as well. Let me know down in the comments if there was anything else I missed. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you next time.